Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Deep Roots episode, exploring the Ozarks, natural communities, and features. I'm your guest host, Sydney Ross, Deep Roots Outdoor Education Manager, and I'm so happy that you're all joining us today. I'm giggling because I'm seeing so many friends and new faces or names rather in the chat. Thanks for all tuning in and letting us know where you're watching from and what's blooming in your garden right now. Hope you all are staying dry with that big storm system that came through the KC region. We needed the rain as always, but you know how it goes. So we have a fabulous show for you all today. But before we begin, I just have a couple of announcements to make. First of all, I'd like to thank Missouri Department of Conservation for sponsoring today's episode and supporting fish and forest wildlife. It's because of Missouri Department of Conservation we have so many beautiful natural landscapes that are still protected here in the state of Missouri. So special thanks to them for sponsoring our episode today and for donors like you for making programs like this possible. Join us every first Friday at the Anita B. Gorman Conservation Discovery Center for our native landscape chat. This is a great opportunity to see what's blooming in the landscape, get inspiration and advice for your own native gardens. Our next session is happening on August 1st at 1 p.m., so I hope you'll join us there. You can register online for this free program and many others by visiting us online at deeproots.org. What's blooming now? You may have seen that I asked you all this question in the chat at the top of today's show. I love exploring the different blooms and faunal connections seen across the Midwest. So if you want to learn more about what's blooming now and monthly gardening tips, as well as naturalist notes, consider signing up for the Deep Roots monthly newsletter, The Pollinator, where you can get some great tips and tricks. Right now, I am finishing up an article about cues for care for summertime gardens, which we all know summer is a tough time to be outdoors and to maintain a garden with all this rain and heat. So consider joining us for that, and I will be sure to include a link to the Pollinator newsletter in the resources following today's show. If you would like to get your hands dirty, join me 3 times a month for Discover Native Gardening at the Anita B. Gorman Conservation Discovery Center, where you can learn skills, be empowered, and grow community. It's one thing to read or watch webinars about native gardening, and it's another to do it by hand. For me personally, I'm an experiential learner, and it's a great way to figure out what's growing in my garden. Do I want to keep it? How do I strategize on weeding techniques or maintenance approaches? All of these are learned across the season from April through September at the Anita B. Gorman Conservation Discovery Center. Like many of our programs, this is a free workshop open to the public, so I hope you'll consider joining us. Our next episode on August 7th will be exploring the Blue River Valley at Camp Branch Glade with Johnson County Parks and Recreation District. Deep Roots webinars are held every first and third Thursday, despite the Zoom message you may have received today, which said it's weekly. We do keep our webinars to be semi-monthly, so please consider tuning in for our next episode at 12 p.m. Central Standard on August 7th. As always, this webinar will be recorded and all resources will be available online. Following today's show, you'll receive an email from me directly, including links to all the things discussed in today's episode, including upcoming events, resources, and topics discussed in today's episode, and more. So keep an eye out for that email coming to your inbox shortly after today's program. And don't forget, drop your comments in the chat and put your questions in the Q&A. At the end of the show, I like to do a little pop quiz, and the winner will receive a copy of the Sand County Almanac written by Aldo Leopold, the godfather of Western naturalism, as well as a fun Ask Me About My Milkweed bumper sticker. So stick around for the end of this episode, and one lucky winner will be mailed a copy of Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac, which is one of my favorite books to read every year because he goes through each season and each month describing his observations and all these different intersections in the ecosystem. So it's worth tuning in and sticking around for that part of the show. If you enjoyed today's episode, I hope you'll visit us online at deeproots.org following today's program for more information on upcoming events, webinars, native gardening resources, and how you can get involved. While you're there, consider making a donation. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with today's episode, exploring the Ozarks, natural communities, and features. Thank you so much and enjoy. There's no place like Missouri. It's an ecologically diverse state where tallgrass prairies, temperate woodlands, lowland forests, swamps, glades, and stream systems merge. Today we'll explore the woodlands, glades, stream banks, and cliff edges seen at Alley Mill Spring and Prairie Hollow Gorge Natural Area. These are just a few examples of natural communities and features seen in the Ozark National Scenic Riverways. But first, what is a natural community and why is this definition important? A natural community is a recurring combination of plants and animals found together in a physical environment. Separating areas into different natural communities, like forests versus savannas versus stream edges, makes it easier to describe and understand. According to The Terrestrial Natural Communities of Missouri by Paul W. Nelson, the distinctive character of landforms in an ecoregion reflects a combination of geophysical processes, vegetational history, climate, unique geology, and the long-term effects of historic disturbances. Defining natural areas by ecological sections helps identify and distinguish natural communities in relation to Missouri's varied landforms. These descriptions offer a deeper understanding of Missouri's complexities. It supports conservation efforts, providing ecological frameworks for natural resource management. Often the most visible expressions of these terrestrial communities are plants. And as a small landscape gardener, having a basic understanding of our natural communities gives us a glimpse into the species combinations and conditions where native plants thrive. In turn, this can aid in species and site selections for cultivated landscapes. Disturbance, whether natural or human-made, has shaped our landscape over time. Humans have had a hand in this in Missouri for over 12,000 years through farming and use of fire. When European settlers arrived, natural communities had co-evolved and adapted to centuries of human-made disturbance. At this point in time, the land represents functioning natural communities with high biodiversity and integrity. It is often used as a reference point for understanding what the land was before colonial exploitation. The industrialization of the mid-19th century exploited the land through large-scale logging, commercial farming, overgrazing, and fire suppression. This aggressive approach devastated and altered natural communities. It wasn't until 1937, through concerned citizens, that the Missouri Department of Conservation was established to protect fish, forest, and wildlife resources to ensure long-term, science-based management practices across the state. Today, MDC manages nearly 1 million acres of public land for conservation and public use across the state. The Ozark Highlands have changed dramatically since European settlers arrived, but it still holds the largest concentration of springs in the United States. One spring that is both iconic and easily accessible is Alley Spring and Mill, located in Eminence, Missouri. Alley Spring is the seventh largest in Missouri, churning 81 million gallons of water a day and has been inhabited by people for centuries. The bright red grain mill that stands today was established circa 1894 and expanded into a general store and blacksmith shop in 1902. The National Park Service has stewarded the mill and spring since 1970, shortly after the Ozark National Scenic Riverway was established. So I'm not sure if you noticed, but this water is blue. And why is that? Well, it's due to a combination of things, but mainly the dolomite and limestone in the bedrock is dissolved by the spring as it flows through the earth, adding a bluish tint to the water. It also appears blue due to its depth. The spring lake is approximately 155 feet deep. The underground channel where the water flows through extends at least 3,000 feet underground. And though you may hear the phrase pure as spring water and think this water is drinkable, it's not. Similarly to open stream water, it has bacteria and microorganisms that can make you sick. Swimming, wading, and fishing are prohibited in the spring as a way to protect this ecosystem for generations to come. But if you'd like a full body experience of the spring, head down to the nearby Jack's Fork River or Current River, both which are spring fed and suitable for swimming and paddling. You can hike around the spring and up to a glade above the mill. I would rate the first trail as easy due to the relatively flat and natural paths, but the second one more moderate due to a slight incline. Many cliff and woodland plants can be seen around the swelling pool, while prairie, woodland edge, and glade species can be seen at higher and drier elevations. There are interpretive signs explaining the history of the mill and discussing fire ecology practices that help maintain the ecosystem. If you visit in the summertime, the National Park Service also offers free talks about the area. Surrounding the spring are dramatic cliff edges. A cliff is defined as a steep to vertical exposure of bedrock or loess being more than 10 feet high. In Missouri, they can be more than 500 feet tall. Limestone and dolomite cliffs, as seen at Alley Spring, can be characterized as either dry or moist and are usually found in floodplains of large streams. These natural communities are open and sparsely vegetated. You'll often see eastern red cedar in its natural habitat here. And though small in appearance, some of the oldest are found here in the Ozark region at over 1,000 years old. They grow here where fire cannot reach them, which is why fire is such an effective tool in managing cedars as they've encroached on prairies. Smooth or wild hydrangea can be seen both in the woodlands and growing out from tiny amounts of soil on the edges of rock formations on the Alley Spring Trail. You can see the amount and type of soil impacts the size of the plant. In a garden or deeper soil setting, this plant can get quite shrubby, but here it's smaller with fewer blooms. But despite its size, it supports summertime bumblebees seeking nectar and pollen. Other species seen growing from the limestone and dolomite cliffs are columbine, alumroot, and goldenrod. These species get trickles of water, but seem to be shaded from hot afternoon sun. As you circle around the spring's basin, you'll also see quintessential purple coneflower blooming in late June. As we head up the slope, the landscape gets significantly drier, with rockier soil. This is a great place for glade species to thrive in areas with an open tree canopy. Glades are dry, rocky landscapes with shallow soil. They can feature different types of rock, like chert, dolomite, and limestone, just to name a few. Drought and stress-tolerant plant species and warm season grasses are found in these areas. Some species that we saw here included pale purple coneflower, prairie dock, butterfly milkweed, and little blue stem. At home, if you have areas with shallow, dry soil that is exposed to 4 hours or more of sunlight, you may consider planting glade-inspired species. We then headed northeast, about a 20-minute drive to our next hike at Prairie Hollow Gorge Natural Area. This natural area is also managed by the National Park Service and sits on 74 acres. It features sheer canyon walls, shut-ins, talus slopes, and igneous glades in the Current River Hills region. This initial hike is easy to navigate, though I highly recommend you do the fashionable hiker's tuck and treat your clothes with permethrin before venturing in the summertime. The ticks are plentiful. So what's the difference between a forest and a woodland? It mainly has to do with canopy coverage. A forest is a relatively large area, typically over 10 acres, dominated by trees forming a closed canopy and interspersed with multi-layered, shade-tolerant, sub-canopy trees, shrubs, vines, ferns, and herbs. Woodlands, on the other hand, are highly variable natural communities with a canopy of trees ranging from 30 to 100% closure, with a sparse understory and dense ground flora, rich in forbs, grasses, and sedges. The woodlands at Prairie Hollow Gorge would be considered dry igneous woodland, which is at a higher elevation with steep slopes. Igneous rock is cooled and solidified molten rock from volcanic activity that shaped the Ozark Highlands over 1.5 billion years ago. The soil here is acidic, supporting native plants like farkleberry, lowbush blueberry, and winged sumac. Once you walk through the oak and pine woodlands at the trailhead, the landscape opens to exposed igneous glades covered in cushions of moss and carpets of lichen. Moss are small plants that do not have vascular structures and reproduce by spores rather than flowers and seeds. Lichens are fungus that grow symbiotically with algae, which forms a crust-like organism on rocks and trees. These slow-growing creatures are valuable indicators of air quality. And due to the diverse species found here, rock climbing is prohibited to protect these delicate, slow-growing species. The trail starts to slope down as we get closer to the gorge. Gnarled, ancient post oaks dot the trail along the cliff's edge. This section of the hike becomes moderate to difficult with large rocks to climb down and up on the way back. If you don't want to climb down, you can get a glimpse of the gorge from above, but I tell you, it's worth it if you can. Large, jumbled boulders cover the valley and are cut through by a stream. Pools and riffles form in between rocks where crawdads and fish can be seen. Along the stream, you'll see water-loving species like sycamore, river birch, and swamp dogwood. Many herbaceous species can be appreciated in the fall, including blue mist flower, cardinal flower, and blue lobelia. Both areas are great to visit year-round and offer different plant and wildlife to discover each season, but they also have their challenges to remain intact. A big pressure is non-native invasive species outcompeting native plants. We can do our part by not planting non-native invasive species and encouraging others to do the same. Angela Sokolowski, MDC's Invasive Species Coordinator, gives us insight on how easily invasive species can spread.
I would love for people to be more aware of the fact that the things that they do on their private property affect the things that we do on publicly managed lands, and also the things that folks bring or do or take with them when they visit public lands can have an effect too. And so prevention of the spread of invasive species is the easiest thing that we can all do. And it's really basic. It's usually invasive plants travel by seed, and seed gets hidden and buried in dirt. And basically, if you want to help me and other land managers prevent the spread of invasive species, you can come with clean shoes, clean bike tread, clean animals, clean vehicles. And when you leave, knock the dirt off of your boots, shake out your tent, wipe down your boat, anything, and pick the burrs off your dogs. Anything that you picked up here, leave it here so that you're not tracking it somewhere else. And anything that came from somewhere else, please don't bring it here. I think you don't have to be a plant nerd or a naturalist who knows every species to know that if you're just coming with clean gear, you're not spreading invasives.
Okay, I think the most common way seeds are hitchhiking with us after we recreate is on our shoes and our clothes. And so there's a really simple thing that you can do is either buy a little brush like this that has kind of a groove picker on it, but you can even get like a toothbrush, right? Like just a brush that you want to clean any sort of dirt and debris off the bottom of your boots and shoes. And luckily, we didn't have any lead that came to our boots today, but I always check too underneath shoelaces and in the seams. Shoelaces tend to catch seeds, especially like grass seeds, all the time. And so just to get in there and brush that out. And if you need to, take off your boot at your car and just unlace it enough that you can pry stuff out. And certain times of year in certain places, especially if you went off trail, there'll be like little Espediza seeds or little beggar's lice or whatever you want to call them stuck to your pants. And it's a great idea to pick those off. Sometimes a brush like this will do a great job. Sometimes a credit card will actually scrape those off really easily. Smart. And you don't have to know if they're native or invasive. You just need to know you're not taking them home. I like that. So pick those off your dogs if you brought your dogs. check out your backpack and make sure you don't have stickers and stuff on that. You can always brush that off. And I just keep my brush on a carabiner on my bag that comes with me. So I remember to do it. Yeah.
That's so great. That's awesome. And where did you find something like this?
That brush is actually sold by NASMA, the North American Invasive Species Management Association, that's promoting the Play, Clean, Go campaign.
Awesome.
So,
yeah, oh, I can see right here. Play, clean, go. That's perfect.
they've got information at playcleango.org, and their mascot is Steward the Sasquatch.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Stuart.
We could all take some cues from Stuart the Sasquatch and be good land stewards ourselves. From Play, Clean, Go, planting native plants, and appreciating these natural areas by being good recreators, we can all appreciate our native landscapes and support biodiversity at home. When you visit, be sure to take photos, not flowers, stay on the trail, and leave no trace so others can appreciate the beauty for generations to come. Stick around. Our live Q&A is coming up next. All right, everybody. So that is just a little glimpse into two of my favorite places to visit in the Ozark region, Alley, Spring and Mill, and Prairie Hollow Gorge. So I want to just mention a couple things, but a big reason why I wanted to go visit the Ozarks and share this with our Kansas City region audience and others who are tuning in is not just to promote visiting the Ozarks, which I highly recommend during the summertime, but also I think it's a really important aspect to look at our natural communities in order to help us determine how we can approach our own landscapes at home on a smaller scale. So specifically, I like to think about the site conditions that I see when I'm out hiking, and also look at plant combinations because that can really help inform what I'm planting at home. For example, I have an area that is heavily sloped, it's very dry and rocky, and has a lot of sunlight. So though it's not the same as an old growth prairie area or a glade, and it doesn't have the same benefits as these natural areas are when they're old growth and we're protecting them. But if we can at least see and relate to these areas out in nature, we are better informed with our own gardening practices. So it kind of is a great way to get inspiration. So if you've ever tuned into my introduction to native landscaping or DIY native landscaping, you'll hear me say, Mother Nature does it best. Go out, get on the trail, and check out these natural communities so that you can get inspired and select potentially good species for your landscape, or rather appropriate species for your landscape. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the Q&A. So folks, if you have questions about your own gardening spaces or places to visit in the Ozarks, go ahead and pop them into the chat, or I'm sorry, pop them into the Q&A. That way I can see them pop up on my screen and answer them accordingly. So our first question comes from friend of the show, Julie Rose, and she would like for us to go ahead and repeat the distinction between a forest and a woodland, which is a great question. So the main difference is between a forest and a woodland comes down to tree density, canopy cover, and light availability. And these are especially important in ecology and land management practices. So a forest tends to have more dense tree coverage, up to 100% canopy coverage. So the trees grow closer together. The treetops, in fact, will touch or nearly touch, which creates significant shade and inhibits a lot of growth in the understory. So it has low ground level sunlight. It limits the growth of grasses and many understory plants. Now, when you look at a woodland, it's going to have more open spaces between the trees and within the canopy. So trees are still the dominant plant type, but they're more spread out. And I believe it said like 30 to 100% canopy coverage. So this open to semi-closed canopy allows for dappled sunlight to reach the ground, which then promotes the growth of understory, herbaceous, and other woody shrub species. So, for example, we have a lot of oak hickory woodlands here in the Kansas City region, as well as in the Ozark region, though they tend to have more oak and pine matrices down there. But you'll see different types of woodlands more often in the state of Missouri than you would full forest. And I think that is in part due to industrialized agriculture and logging, which really eliminated quite a bit of our forests in the state of Missouri. Another distinction between the two is forests tend to be cooler and more humid, and woodlands often have more transitional zones and support more plant and animal diversity due to the increased sunlight and layered habitat. Okay, so our next question. Thank you, Julie, for that question. That was a great one. Okay. Um, so I'm going to answer real quick. Kathy, you have a great question. So we mentioned invasive species, and spotted knapweed was one of those invasive species that is seen in the Ozarks. You'll also see Cerisa lespedeza, Johnson grass, sweet white clover, I think is what it's called. Admittedly, I'm not an invasive species expert. We will have a feature episode with Angela Sokolowski, one of my favorites and an incredibly insightful invasive species coordinator with the Missouri Department of Conservation. But in our episode today, it's just the spotted knapweed that we highlighted as the invasive species. There was sweet briar featured right after that, which is a native found there and is not invasive. So great question, Kathy. Okay, Paula is asking about more invasive species, which is great. As we know, invasive species really endanger our natural landscapes. They outcompete our native plants, which then do not provide support for our native wildlife. So, because our native flora and fauna have evolved together for millennia, they kind of have this important thing going on. And when we introduce plants from elsewhere in the world, they haven't had the chance to evolve with the wildlife around us and therefore don't have biological pressure to keep them in check, and they don't provide the benefits, the food sources for our wildlife. Okay, so Paula is asking about birdfoot trefoil in a native area. Is there a good way to eradicate this? Again, I am not an expert on invasive species, but I did a little bit of research on it, and so there's a couple things you can do in the meantime. And then, Paula, I'd recommend you go ahead and send me an email specifically about this invasive species, and I will connect you with the appropriate expert to help you with your situation. But mainly what I'm saying is you want to make sure, or bird's-foot trefoil, which is Lotus corniculatus, it's a tough invader, especially in native grasslands, prairies, and glades, because it's nitrogen fixing, persistent, and can outcompete our native forbs and grasses. The best approach to eradicating it is combines both targeted mechanical control, so hand pulling, and maybe even mowing before those flowers are pollinated and set to seed, as well as potentially using herbicide and restoration strategies to favor our native species. So, of course, when you're dealing with invasive species, it's always first important to assess the situation. You want to see, do you have individual plants? Do you have patches that are spreading out in the landscape? How would you rate it? Is it a light or moderate infestation, or is it heavy? Is it covering tons of space? Because once you understand and observe how it's impacting your landscape, you could then decide what the best approach for eradication would be. So manual and mechanical practices like hand pulling or digging, that can be helpful. But as you all may know, when you disturb the soil, you're disturbing the seed bank, which is going to pop up potentially more plants, potentially undesirable ones at that. So I like to try to be very strategic with how much soil I'm actually disturbing. And though I don't have my 6-point paint scraper on hand right now, it is one of my favorite weeding tools, and it's great because you can just very carefully imagine this is like the paint scraper, and here's the soil. You can go in at a 45-degree angle and root dock that little plant that's coming up here and get a good chunk of that root and very cleanly remove it without doing too much soil disturbance. So consider that. I will go ahead and put that a link to that tool in the resources following today's show. They're super affordable, which is great because I tend to lose mine in the landscape when I'm really getting in there. But that could be useful on a small scale situation. Now, I mentioned mowing. So if you do it just before flowering, it can reduce the amount of seed that is set. And as you all know, both the best way for a plant to spread, if you want it to spread, or if you don't, is allowing that seed to stay or allowing that flower to hang out and get pollinated, which once it's pollinated, it's going to go to seed and continue to spread. So maybe you want a native plant of yours to spread throughout your garden, but if you don't, you got to make sure you're removing that flower before it can go to seed. So you could mow it, and repeated mowing, it may weaken the plant. It won't fully get rid of it. It's something that I like to call insulting the plant, which stealing that phrase from my buddy Stephen Van Ryan of Kansas City Parks and Rec. But I do think sometimes you got to be strategic in what your ability is and the situation is. So consistent mowing could help weaken that plant as you continue to utilize other application methods. And then I'm not going to comment on herbicide. I use herbicide in my landscape to control certain invasive species, but I'm not sure which one would be best for this practice. So again, please go ahead and email me your questions about invasive species, and I can connect you with the powers that be who know a thing or two about appropriate herbicide use. Okay, so moving on, we've got several more questions. And don't forget, folks, here in about 10 minutes or so, we will do our pop quiz, and one lucky winner will go home with or receive at their home via mail, snail mail, a copy of the Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold and a bumper sticker, Ask Me About My Milkweed. So stick around, that'll be coming up shortly. Okay, so Val is asking, did you notice a big difference in plants on the igneous and dolomite glades? The different pH should make a difference. That's a great question, Val. And pH does play a part in what species will show up. So we did see some different species. So on the dolomitic glades, I saw a lot of pale purple cone flower. I saw prairie dock on both types of glades. I saw more prairie dropseed on the igneous glades, and I saw more world milkweed also on the igneous glades. Trying to think what other things I saw in the woodlands, like the igneous glades seen at Prairie Hollow Gorge. We saw a lot more. I saw a lot more like acidic loving shrubs like farkleberry and low bush blueberry. And both of those are related. They're both in the same family, which makes sense. And also some winged sumac. So you're absolutely correct. pH can make a difference. And when we bring it back to a home garden setting, a lot of times folks will say, hey, I've got these pine trees located in my garden. Are they going to alter the pH of my landscape? And yes, they can, certainly, especially if they've been established for a while. I want to make mention that shortleaf pines are the only native pines found in the state of Missouri. And in my personal experience, it seems they prefer the Ozark area, probably due to the pH and the soil type and the rock formations found down there compared to our very clay-based soil up here in Kansas City. But yeah, so it's something to think about. Also, kind of on that topic, you'll see at garden centers they sell pine needle mulch, which is very cool. I love the look of pine needle mulch. And people ask, is that going to affect the pH? Now, if you don't have a pine tree in your yard or garden, one that is, consistently there and changing that soil content, that pH level over time, I don't think you're going to have any issues with pH change if you're occasionally using a pine needle mulch, at least not in our experience at the Discovery Center. We've used it in areas like Sycamore Station, around hazelnuts, and around the shortleaf pines because it felt very appropriate. We also have dogwoods over there, and we still get things like our wingstem crownbeard, which is a very like disturbant type plant that will pop up just about anywhere, and it doesn't seem to be phased by it, and neither do our other herbaceous plants. So kind of an interesting topic is soil pH. And I'm not an expert in that topic either, so I can't speak to it much more, but I think it's something to definitely consider. And when you go and explore these different areas in the Ozark, you'll see these different natural communities. And a lot of times that is based on the soil that they're found in and the different conditions there. Great question, Val. Okay, so anonymous attendee says we had to take out 3 trees due to lightning damage, and now they need to figure out the newly created woodland that they have. So, disturbance, as you all heard in today's episode, is natural. Of course, people create a lot of disturbance through creating new infrastructure and development, farming, all types of things. But nature also creates disturbance, like lightning, flooding. We've had tons of rain. I think Lenexa got like 8.5 inches of rain overnight, so lots of flooding happening over there. And so that can alter your landscape. So what do you do? Whenever I talk about designing a native garden, or just creating some kind of garden, it's always really important to take time to observe your space. So if you have been working in this garden, anonymous attendee, you're probably already aware of what this space was like prior to losing those limbs. But now I encourage you to see where the light is hitting and what time of day the light is hitting that area, because that is going to make a big impact on the plant choices that you might consider. Some species can handle the late hot afternoon sun, also known as part sun conditions, where they're getting blasted with 4 hours of that late afternoon sun, compared to, let's say, this area is just getting exposed to morning sun, which tends to be on the cooler side. So plants have different needs, just like people. So you'll want to be thinking about that. But in the resources following today's show, I'm going to include some suggestions, like some common plant species found in woodlands, forests, glades, prairies, just like a top 3 to 5 species, just to wet your whistle and get you excited for the possibilities of your new garden. So change can always be difficult, but we roll with the punches, and it just gives you a new opportunity to explore some new gardening areas. Okay, Molly Miller is asking about do we know of any good trails in the Ozarks that offer opportunities for swimming? Okay, so here is my recommendation for you. You don't have to necessarily camp in one of these places to go and swim there, but we have some different campgrounds, like Pull Tight Campground is one of my favorites, where you can park in the parking lot and then walk right down to the river and swim in those areas there. I will mention that a lot of these entrance points to the rivers can have swift currents. So it's not necessarily one of those places where it's going to be like a leisurely pool that's just open for you to jump in. But you'll be kind of walking through and find some areas, but just be mindful of the currents down there, especially with rain coming through, that can alter conditions of the river. In fact, when I was down there a couple weeks ago, we were hit with about 3 days of rain. And not only did it make for the currents to be much swifter, but also made the waters a bit muddier, which can also drag in limbs and make for dangerous conditions. So please be sure, if you do go down to visit, which I recommend you do, it's my favorite place on earth, the Ozark region. Just make sure you're minding the weather and being safe. And if you do paddle on those rivers down there, always wear your flotation devices. Okay. Denise is asking about recommendations for under cedar trees. So, cedar trees are such an interesting and polarizing topic. Oftentimes people describe them as invasive, which for me, I think of an invasive species specifically as a non-native species that can have negative impacts in our environment and our economy because of reasons I mentioned before. They outcompete our native flora, which provides support for our native fauna. And they don't have any biological to keep them in check, which is why they can so easily proliferate in these climates, which are very similar to their places of origin. So I don't consider a cedar tree, eastern red cedar, to be invasive because they are native to Missouri. They do become problematic, however, when they encroach into our prairies, because as you can imagine, when trees start growing in our prairies, it's no longer a prairie. It's starting to become a shrubby prairie to eventually a woodland. So for those cedar trees beneath them, if you're planning on keeping them, I have seen species of pussy toe actually grow underneath them, specifically Antenaria parlinii, which we had featured in the show earlier. I saw them at Prairie Hollow Gorge, so they will be included in that species list following today's program with our resources. Other species you could try, maybe some sedges, but I think due to how thick eastern red cedars can get, they often don't allow a lot of sunlight beneath their canopy. And then I'm assuming they're also altering the pH of but I'm not entirely positive on that. So those would be two areas or two species I would recommend. Parlinii's pussy toes, Antenaria parlinii, as well as various sedges. You might try cedar sedge. I would assume those are probably found out near and around cedars. You could try oak sedge. I always like to say, when in doubt, sedge it out, especially beneath the dry, near the trunk of a tree, which is kind of a drier area. I see Christine Garhart says that she's growing native ginger under her cedar. So if you folks have any experiences with growing native plants under your cedars, let's crowdsource this. Pop it into the chat and let us know what has been working for you. Thanks for the question, Denise. Or Dennis. Sorry, Dennis. Okay. I've got a question from Adrian Black. If shortleaf pine is the only native pine in Missouri and they usually grow in the Ozarks, should we not be planting any kind of pine in other parts of Missouri? I'm specifically curious about west central Missouri, south of KC a bit. If we could, what variety would be best? That's a really great question. So first I want to say at Deep Roots, we are not purists. Like we like to meet gardeners where they're at, and we don't judge or diminish people who don't plant native plants, right? Or plants that are specifically native just to the Kansas City area. With humans coming into the landscape almost 13,000 years ago here in the state of Missouri, we've changed a lot, including climate. Our climate has changed because of people. So with that in mind, certain ranges for plants are starting to shift north. I know our catalpa trees, which are a deciduous tree, which I love, typically more of a southern species, are now becoming more prevalent further north. But it's true, shortleaf pine is the only native pine found in Missouri. I wouldn't discourage you from planting shortleaf pine, but I will tell you it's likely they're not going to thrive up here. Again, our soil is so full of clay and is not rocky and acidic like it is down in the Ozark on those igneous glades or igneous woodlands. They're not going to be as happy here. We do have some shortleaf pine that are planted at the Discovery Center, and they're growing. They're doing okay. But if you want a healthy, more resilient tree, there are better options out there than the shortleaf pine for the Kansas City region. But again, that's just my personal philosophy. Other people may disagree or have other insights, so just something to consider. But thank you for your question, Adrian. That's a great one. Also, Molly, I wanted to mention the question about opportunities for swimming. I will list in our resources a couple places there because I love nothing more than swimming in a spring-fed Ozark River. It is like the place I want to be in the summertime, especially. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and jump into our pop quiz question. Oh, okay, we got some good feedback real quick. Christine says MDC does grow white pine at the state nursery. Okay, so there are some options there as well. So thank you for that. All right, now for our pop quiz. So for this particular pop quiz, it's going to be a little different than how I've done them before. This is a multi-choice question. Okay, folks, so I'm going to go ahead and read the question and put the answer, rather put the question in the chat for you all to read, as well as read it aloud for you all. Which of the following is most characteristic of an Ozark glade? Dense tree canopy, moist shaded soil, or thin soils, overexposed bedrock, or marshy ground? Put your answers in the chat and we will pick a winner, the first person to get it correct. Well, you all were paying attention clearly. So the answer is C, thin soils, overexposed bedrock. And David Morrow, you are the first person to answer that correctly. So if you will email me your address, I'm going to mail out a copy of the Sand County Almanac by Alda Leopold, as well as one of our bumper stickers by Andy Osier, local Kansas City artist. Ask me about my milkweed. Great job, everybody. So thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. We have a great one coming up for you in a couple weeks. And it is Exploring the Blue River Valley at Camp Branch Glade with Johnson County Parks and Recreation District. I hope you'll tune in then to check this out. It's a very cool place to visit. Bring your family, bring your dog on leash, and enjoy the wonders of this natural area. And in the meantime, if you have any gardening questions, be sure to let us know at hello@deeprootskc.org. Thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.